I guess now we should proceed with our forum. And I've got a very important information for you. We just discussed it with my colleagues, and we decided that instead of this session, we will probably have another round of coffee with a very interesting person upstairs. That was the example of disinformation. And now we're going to talk about disinformation and how to fight it. And instead of the mystery guest upstairs, we have great guests here and online. And let me introduce our speakers for this panel. Mr. Uldis Elksnitis, who is Information and Communication Officer, East Stratcom Task Force, European External Action Service. He will join us online. Mr. Mykola Balaban, who is the Academic Director, Head of the Center for Economic Studies, Institute for Economic Research and Political Consultations, which is not true. And Jakub Olchowski, catch me if I lie again, Head of the Department of Eastern Europe, Institute for Central Europe, Poland, and Rufin Zamfir, who is a Programs Director of the Global Focus from Romania, who is joining us online. And the discussion today will be devoted to Russian disinformation in the Central European states, current narratives and approaches to counteraction. And we're going to have 2 rounds of questions from me. First, we'll start with a personalized question, then I will ask a general question to all the participants, and afterwards we'll proceed with the questions and answers, which I believe can be the most interesting and the most important part of our conversation today. And to start with, let me quote. "Make no mistake, Russia lied, lies, and will contribute to lie unless the pro-Kremlin disinformation apparatus is irreversibly dismantled, and those pushing the lies about Russia's, not just Putin's, war in Ukraine are tried alongside all other pro-Kremlin war criminals." That's yesterday's tweet of Uldis. And my question to you is, what should be done to make all these people who are spreading Russian propaganda accountable, and what's being done on behalf of the EU?
All right. Good afternoon. I hope everybody can hear me.
Right.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sergiy, I see that we're diving straight into the deep end, and I don't get to talk about narratives and what's out there and all that. But I think that that is the question. Of course, that is the question, what it is to be done to bring these people to account. And why that's important, I think we're all very much aware that disinformation, information manipulation isn't just making us feel bad. It isn't just convincing us to do or not do, to go to the elections or not go to the elections. We've seen that it can have very real, very terrifying, very violent consequences and very real human cost. And that's why it is obviously a bit of a personal position that those who are behind pushing these lies, pushing this disinformation, are equally guilty as those who are carrying out the orders on the battlefield, because they're preparing the information space, they're preparing the mindsets, they're preparing the readiness and the willingness of those carrying out actual physical kinetic atrocities to commit those crimes. So, what it is that needs to be done about this, or what can be done about this. Of course, this is always a bit of a fine line, between freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and what is information manipulation and interference. And every time this question comes up to me, when people come and say, well, but how can we curtail all the propagandists, all the disinformation out there? isn't that contrary to our fundamental values of freedom of speech and freedom of expression? Every time I'm countering this, I invite people who make the case for freedom of speech to spend a few minutes listening to Mr. Solovyov or Ms. Simonia or Ms. Skabaeva. In about 7 minutes' time, it is obvious to everybody that the horrendous lies and incitement of violence and hate speech that pours out of these people must not be protected by our values and our understanding and our protections that we afford to freedom of speech. Now, what it is that we try to do, of course, in the EU, we need to have legal backing. We're not, an authoritarian regime. We need to have substantial evidence if we are to go after these people, these channels, these outlets. So that's one of the things, and you see behind me there is, I hope everybody in this room has already noticed this orange little block that says EU versus Disinfo. And while it had started as a raising awareness project some 7 years ago or so, and I'd say it's a tremendously successful project for raising awareness, just in 8-10 months of this year, our website has seen a tripling of traffic. We've now reached about 2.5 million people. So there's a good bit of raising awareness, but that's not what we need to do to bring the people, the liars, to account. What we do need to do is gather evidence. And our efforts to raise awareness and to collect cases, specific times, specific moments, specific shows where these people propagating hate speech have unashamedly advocated for genocide, for nuclear holocaust. So we try to document all of that with where it appeared, who was saying it. We try to save all those videos because, with the Kremlin pro-disinformation, one day it's there and the next day it is nowhere to be found. And of course, once you put something online, it's always there. But it's very hard to keep track of these things. So we try to save everything, double everything up, have our own backups. We have a repository of some 14,000 cases now. And if anybody was to make the case that there is no information operations targeting Ukraine, I'd invite to have a look at this. From the 14,000 cases that we've collected since 2015, about 6,500 of those are specifically targeting Ukraine. So the first step, of course, is this collection of evidence, which we have been doing. Now, obviously, with just knowing the problem and admiring the problem, if you will, is just a half step, and we need to take a full step. And I think the most powerful and the most impactful tool that the European Union has at its disposal is, of course, restrictive measures, also known as sanctions. Now, one thing, of course, is to sanction and impose restrictive measures on the wealth and well-being of specific propagandists, and I think that's one way to go. To ensure that these people cannot attend their villas on Lago di Como and can't use their yachts and cruise around the Caribbean. That's a small hit, but it's an important hit. But more importantly, we need to document the evidence of the outlets of the system, of the ecosystem that the Kremlin has built. And we need to cut those outlets. And I think it was a great step forward that was done early in March with suspending the broadcasting rights of notorious information manipulation weapons, RT and Sputnik. And I think there's a lot more work to be done, and that's something that we're currently working on, is preparing this evidence and these examples to be able to take down more of these outlets, because that's really the first step that we need to do, is take down, stop the poison, if I can say so. Before we can start healing the people, we need to stop the poison. We need to cut all of these outlets. There's a growing trend, if you will, to look at how information is being manipulated, which is very important. We need to see the behavior, how these systems are built, But I think to bring people to account, it's also very important to document what they are saying. There was an example from a few weeks ago that not entirely sure why this was the one person that was dismissed from RT, but you know, when you advocate drowning and burning and murdering Ukrainian children, that to me deserves you a spot on the bench in The Hague, because you're openly calling for genocide and you're excusing war crimes, which ought to be punishable. So that's what we do. We try to document the instances of all these people so that once the time comes, and of course this is a rather unsatisfactory answer. I don't think that we're quite there yet with the trying. But once the time of the trials, and on a personal level, I truly believe that there will be a time that these people will be brought to account. And that's what we're trying to do, is prepare for that moment so we have enough evidence to hold them accountable. I'll stop here, otherwise I think I'll trail on and on and on about this. It's a topic that's very, very dear and close to my heart. And I can tell that on our side, this is everything else has been put on pause. This is where we put a lot of our effort, a lot of our money, and a lot of our human resources is now capturing, collecting, and exposing these people for what they are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for both your empathy and your efforts. Because justice is something that is really needed as an outcome of this war. And now let me move further to our next speaker, Mykola, who is
I will introduce
actually the Deputy Director of the Ukrainian Center of Strategic Communications and Information Security. And when preparing for the session, I read one of your interviews for Hromadske Radio. And there you said that disinformation is a very cheap instrument to get political goals. But it didn't work in Ukraine, therefore Russia had to move forward with a kinetic approach. So my question is, if it doesn't work, should we really care about it?
Thank you. My mic is working or not? I think, yeah, great, so thank you. Direct answer to your question, yes, we should. And it is very important because, okay, in Ukraine, they does not manage to perceive those goals that they are tried. But when we're talking about the world, and in different parts of the world, they actually quite good in that. And they propaganda and disinformation and information operations, they are still like working quite well. And we see this on the political level, for example, with India or the countries that we say like global south. So definitely we should care about. We need to pour some resources. And also we have to understand that this Russian propaganda and disinformation, now it is a part, it's like basically it's like information war against Ukraine. And it's going on in parallel with like kinetic war. And that's why both inside of Ukraine, we should like work a lot in countering all these malign narratives. Also, we need to work closely with our like closest friends and allies in Central Europe and also in Western Europe. It's a little bit like different target auditories for the for these different types of information operation. But we need to constantly work and it's also like frontline. And I think the whole auditory understand that like information warfare is like one of the front lines in this war. So let's in my presentation that I prepare for you, it's actually it's like from the two parts, answering to the question of the panel. So when we're talking about Central Europe, okay, let's start from a little bit further. we at the center are working a lot with different CSOs groups and with governmental institutions around the Europe, and also we have like different types of monitoring. It's like not very interesting, but like rather monotonous work of gathering those narratives. And what we see right now, especially so when we make a like small retrospective about Central Europe and key disinformation narratives, we at the center we see the next one. The first one is Europeans are forced to endure economic problems because of Ukraine. It's what we see in, maybe my colleagues from Central Europe can support that thesis or discharge it. Ukrainian refugees are uncultured and the source of crime, disease and economic problems. Ukraine will lose the war eventually because Russia is very big and Ukraine small and all around, blah, blah, blah. Western military weapons are stolen in Ukraine. In Ukraine, United States developed biological weapons in secret laboratories. It's very like funny for us Ukrainians. We are like absolutely refute this information as like very poor joke. But actually, in the world, I don't know. We know a little bit. We understand why. But actually, in the world, but also in Central Europe, those narrative is still working around some circles. And there is like smaller one, but key here is like this three. And according to our center, according to like our vision, what we need to do to, as I told you, in this philosophy of like information warfare, and what we need to do together, I mean, Central Europe, to counter those narrative, is the first of all is like positive narrativization, and it's what I mean positive narrativization, to prepare as much as possible like some positive cases of like gratitude from Ukrainians to, for example, to Poles for all support, to prepare informational campaign. I mean, I think jointly, because it's always about the problem of resources, but like jointly, Ukrainian government, civil society, and also like government of countries in Central Europe and civil society, with like some with like tackling some like key of those messages from those narratives. Yeah, and we have a lot of job to do. I disagree a little bit with this thesis that like already like Central Europe understand fully what is going on, and it's not so we don't need, you know, to draw our attention for the Central Europe, because we already like know what to do, and it's very hard, for example, to manipulate polls that actually Russia is like good and Ukraine is bad in this conflict. But it's not like that. We need to work because like Central Europe also, like they are on the front line of this Ukrainian, like these refugees. They are sheltering refugees. They have like very tough economic impact from that. They support us and help us a lot, but they also have like the society, they have the politics, and they have their own like problems and vulnerabilities. And Russian information machine is very good in like catching these vulnerabilities, working like drawing these vulnerabilities and rework them with their like this information operations and this propaganda machine with very precise messages for like very precise groups, which is at the end of the day make much harder for political class in Central European countries, you know, to agitate for supporting Ukraine. So yeah, sorry for long answer for your question.
Thank you very much. When you've mentioned positive narrativization and biolabs at the same time, I just thought about biolabs that have very positive personnel. But let's move forward to Jakub. Jakub, in your recent chapter to the book Disinformation Narratives and Memory Politics in Russia and Belarus, you wrote the chapter which is named How to Weaponize Information. Then you probably know how to disarm information. But at least for those who haven't read the book, because it costs $30, can you tell us a little bit more about your experience and Polish experience?
Yeah, certainly. First of all, thank you very much for inviting to this brilliant event. By the way, for the last 20-something years, I attended tens of conferences, and this is the first one in a shelter. Hopefully the last one. Gratitude to Vladimir Vladimirovich.
We call him a different way in Ukraine.
I know. How to disarm disinformation? It's a difficult question because Russian disinformation is a machine, just like my colleagues said very correctly. This is a machine. It's not. It's not just a tool. It's not just a knife and fork that you can use. It's systemic, and it is because it comes from directly from the nature of Russia. Many people say that what is this information? Is it really so dangerous, weaponized, etc.? No, because disinformation, deception, propaganda, manipulation was used always, also in warfare. Even the Chinese 4,000 years ago, they used, they advised how to use this information in warfare. And people also say, what's so special about Russian disinformation? Everyone uses disinformation and manipulation also in warfare. It's obvious. Yes, they are right, but not necessarily. Firstly, today disinformation is something different than it used to be for centuries, because we live in an information era, not agrarian era. We don't use anymore muscles, human muscles, animal muscles to fight, to work, and as a resource. We don't live, or partially, we don't live in an industrial era, so we don't use machines to work and to fight, partially. We live in an information era, so we use information to work, to fight, and as a resource. So it's systemic. This is why so hard to fight disinformation. We live in some Polish professor called it. I love this phrase, this notion. He said that we live in an information smog, because we are so overloaded with information every day. That it's a kind of a fog, so it makes us blind, but also it's poisonous, like a smog. I think it's a good description of today's infosphere in general. And what about Russia? You told it, the colleagues told it. Russia is great when it comes to disinformation and manipulation for at least 4 reasons. Number one, Russia is built on lies. It's obvious for everyone who knows Russia. And of course, the problem is that the West doesn't understand it, unfortunately. Number two is that Russia has know-how, because they have been lying and manipulating for centuries. So they know how to do it. They are perfect about it. You know, the old traditional politics of divide et impera. You divide people, you polarize people, so it's much easier to manipulate them and to rule them and so on. Number three, the Russian strategic culture. Russia is always at war, so they weaponize everything. Mark Galeotti, a brilliant expert on Russia, wrote it recently. Russia weaponized everything. All right, there is a very fashionable phrase, hybrid warfare. But we have to remember that hybrid warfare is totally differently understood in Russia and in China and in the West. Because the Chinese and the Americans understand hybrid warfare in military terms. They understand hybrid as a combination of different military activities and operations, guerrilla, urban operations, etc. The Russians understand hybrid warfare differently. It's a combination of, it's a non-linear warfare, just like Mykola said, using all available resources of the state to conduct a war. It's not only kinetic, it's not only tanks, rockets and artillery, it's everything, energy, information, etc., etc. This is what Russian does, and this is why it's so hard to fight it. This is so difficult. And number 4, very important, it's an asymmetry between the West and the Russia, or in other words, between democracy and autocracy, because Russia is perfect in using our values, our Western values and norms, and in taking advantage of them. For example, freedom of speech. Right? Can you imagine pro-Western media in Russia? No, because this is an autocratic state and it controls the infosphere. We don't, because we are free. So you have Russian trolls, pro-Russian media, pro-Russian politicians in Europe and in the West. So what? Nothing. It's a freedom of expression, freedom of speech. You cannot just put them in jail. Russians do it. We don't. And they take advantage of it, and we cannot fight it. Because how? We would, well, it would take a total denial of our values. It would be a failure of the West, of all values, of all fundaments of the West. This is why it is so difficult, but sorry for talking for so long, but you know, I also represent university, so I have a tendency to talk too long. But to your question, how to fight it? I think that the shortest answer is education. It's education, education, and one more time education. If we look at Scandinavia, Scandinavia is always a step ahead of us. They have special programs at schools, and they teach kids how to, how to recognize this information, how not to be manipulated, etc. So that's for the beginning. Perhaps we will continue this this threat, how to fight disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you, but you know, education takes time, and we need some immediate responses, which is a challenge. Now we move to Rufin, to Romania. Are you with us?
Yeah.
Great.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do. So my question to you is also related to one of your publications. That was a report called Toxic Pacifism in Extremist Discourse about the Russia-Ukraine War. So how to detox it? How to make it less extreme? Is there any answer?
Well, thank you. First and foremost, thank you very much for having me in this truly interesting panel and really timely event that you've organized. Well, coming to your question, there are several answers. None of them, unfortunately, are easy to implement. And being the last one in this panel discussing about solutions to this, I can only be either the contrarian and and pick on things that were already said, or be the one presenting easy and again unimplementable solutions. I shall start though, because my colleagues here in this panel already talked extensively on the supply side of disinformation, on what, who and how this machine, this propaganda, disinformation machine looks like, and who are the ones gearing it. And I would love to touch a bit on the demand side of this toxic narratives. And the demand side, on the demand side of this process lays the population, lays our societies, lays those who for a number of years were left behind, even though we were out loud saying that we as Democrats are not going to let anyone behind, but we did, and our politicians did, and that's why we have nowadays the political framework that looks as it looks all across the Europe, not just European Union, but elsewhere too, with radical populists, if not far-right fascists, being part of our parliament and taking advantage of this insane war that Russia started on Ukraine, taking advantage of this backdrop to advance their anti-democratic agenda. How should we detoxify the narrative? It's truly difficult. I mean, unfortunately, and I'll be with you, Sergiy, on this, education by itself is not going to solve a problem, because education's only generating results over 2 generations, if we're lucky. We need to engage all the efforts. We need to have all the guns out in countering and detoxifying this this flood of disinformation and propaganda. And how we can do this, you asked. Well, perhaps something that was not already thrown on the table today is by making their efforts expensive, by making their efforts being expensive. How can we do this? Well, first and foremost, we need to be, all of us, on the same page. We need to understand that there aren't single-side solutions to this. There are only whole of society, ideally whole of society solutions, and less ideally whole of elites solutions. By whole of elites, I mean the government and civil society and academia and journalists should be all engaged into countering this nefarious phenomenon that propaganda is, and disinformation even. So that's the start for this. Furthermore, we need to understand as government bodies, we need to understand that our role is not to regulate for the sake of regulation. We need to regulate for the people, for those who sent us in parliament. And we need to understand that we're agenda setters, not agenda takers. We need to understand that we have huge responsibility towards the whole population, not just towards those who voted us into office. We need to correct perceptions. We need to do better, right? To be better as politicians. Unfortunately, I'm going to give you just this example, Romania's example. The public trust in political institutions in Romania historically is around 10%, 10–12%. You cannot do anything. You're just not credible enough if you're at 10–12%, right? Moving forward to journalism, and somebody mentioned in the previous panel, unfortunately I wasn't able to attend the whole panel, somebody said at the end of it, tell good stories, guys. First and foremost, understand the way people speak, and tell the stories, the way people can internalize them, can transform them into even into lessons learned for their lives. Unfortunately, all across Europe, the state, the journalism, the current journalism is in. It's not the best. It's not something that we can be proud with. But there are enough independent journalists, and there's a huge hunger for good journalism out there. And I know for a fact that there are enough money in funders' coffers to finance this independent journalism that can tell good stories. Then moving forward to civil society, what we've understand, I hope that this lesson is going to stay with us for as long as civil society is going to exist. What we've learned, not just after February 24, but after 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea, what we've understand, at least in a transatlantic framework, what we've understand is that civil society can generate transformation if it works together, not just independent organizations putting out independent, really good reports, but written in a single organization. We work better in networks. We work better sharing ideas. We work better using same methodology. You've mentioned the report Global Focus put out a couple of weeks ago, or even more than this, on toxic pacifism. And this report is one instance of work done better together. We've done this together with similar organizations in Poland and Hungary and Serbia. And we've not just researched our societies if there's this peace by all means narrative out there. We haven't checked independently our societies to see if there is enough push on our politicians to well decide or to put a break in helping Ukraine if Ukraine is not ready to make peace with Russia. And I'm closing the quotations here. We've done this report in comparing how parts of our societies are pushing this same or very similar narratives in our countries. I shall mention that we've checked the existence of this toxic narrative, toxic pacifism narratives in the far right pockets in our populations. Because and perhaps we will touch more on audiences during this panel. Perhaps it's not new for anyone around this table that in our societies there are political actors, if not even political parties, who are benefiting from the way the conversation is framed on the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. And these political forces are very much local. Some of them, if not most of them, don't have links with Russia, but they're pushing the same agenda. They're projecting a bigger a shade than they are by using one another, by borrowing narratives from one another, and by articulating their narratives in their press with quotations for actors from outside our borders. So, for example, Romania's Alliance for Romanian Unity, the far-right political party in our parliament, is very much supporting its allegations on the way these narratives are anti-democratic, anti-EU narratives are framed in Poland. So I'm going to stop here. I know I didn't provide an answer to your very good question, but I think that's why we're doing this gathering. That's why we're putting ideas together to fight the fight and find common answers to this.
Thank you very much, Rufin. So basically we try to find the answers, and there is no universal answer, and there are a few approaches. We should think about education, we should think about being resilient and building resilience, we should think about enhancing critical thinking, and we should work with our audiences, with our societies. My second question to each of the speakers, this time without any personalization, is what should we do with the Russian audience? I mean, millions of dollars were spent on building democracy in Russia. Should we finally admit that it's impossible and just isolate them? Or otherwise, should we seek for some alternative solutions? Because we cannot provide education to Russian audience. We cannot make them resilient without their consent. We basically can do nothing. Then should we do anything? And let's start in the same order with you, Uldis. What do you think?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for this question. This is a question I spend a lot of time thinking about. And the initial thought of this is not a happy picture. And I don't want to lie about it. I don't want to pretend that we're any better than we are 30-some years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We've seen that it has come back with a vengeance. And there hasn't been a reconciliation with its own imperial past. Now, is that a reason to cut off all ties, build a wall around Russia, and isolate it? I don't think so, for several reasons. And I'm going to hark back about 80 years. I don't think that particularly this moment in time is not particularly opportune. It's very fashionable to talk about seeking ways to penetrate Russian information space, to bring messages to local communities. That's all fair and well, but what we have to understand before that, I used this analogy in my previous intervention about stopping the poison. I mean, people need to stop drinking the tea served by the Kremlin, and we all know what the tea from the Kremlin contains. You know, there's usually a fair bit of poison in it, before we can start the healing process. Now, for that to happen, is a rather uncomfortable thing. We need to dismantle this machine entirely and totally and irreversibly. And then we can think about democratization processes and supporting civil society. Now, at this moment in time, it might seem like this is an impossible task, but there have been precedents of a re-education, of a reconciliation of a nation with its own horrendous, violent, traumatic past. We can look at Germany after the war. We can look at Japan that went through a very painful reconciliation process with its own crimes. And from those ashes, then we can build onwards. And I'm afraid until we get there, there's not going to be all that much that our efforts to strengthen independent media, to facilitate networks of civil society in Russia, to provide our support, I don't think that will cut it at this point. Now, not to sound too apocalyptic about this, all of what I just said doesn't mean that we don't need to keep supporting them. It's about keeping the embers alive. At the moment, they're facing incredible odds. The few and far between voices in Russia that are critical of the regime, that do understand what has been done to their country, what has been done to their people for decades, the brainwashing, the absolute and total mind control that has been expanded over the Russian populace. There are people who understand and who would be willing to push back on that. I mean, especially since the war, I mean, Russia's absolutely decimated its last remnants of free and independent media, and it's understandable that even those who would speak up are right now not in a position to do so. So I think it's a bit of a strategic patience that is needed on our side. There aren't any immediate solutions, and the hard truth is, before we can start building pluralistic, independent media as the backbone for a democratic society in Russia, there needs to be an overhaul of its current political apparatus, and there needs to be a whole of society reconciliation with its own crimes. And that will take decades. And that's why I'm a huge believer in the healing effects of education or re-education. And I completely agree with it. Was it Rufin who said it'll take 2 generations? If it will be 2 generations, I think we're lucky if we can get this done in 2 generations' time. And it's a hard truth, but I think that is the only way towards a sustainable and lasting peace in this continent.
Thank you.
And sorry for a very gloomy answer.
Thank you very much. And Mykola, what's your opinion about that from the Ukrainian perspective? But try to be brief.
Okay, thank you. I will try. So first of all, let's think about this. We have like the 2 surfaces. So the first surface is like what to do right now, because we right now have the war and there is like some Russian society, and in this society there is something going on, and we see this through this. Of course, we not believe too much about this researches of public opinion, but there is like this some changes in and like less people are like supporting the war, you know, this play. So of course we need, I mean, collectively also in Central Europe, we need to try as much as possible, you know, to work also with some different auditories in Russia. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible, but actually there is a lot of interesting projects. They are not very public. And the second, like this surface, like a more strategic or intellectual on strategic or intellectual level, it's the big problem. It's like to analyze, especially from the Western Europe. I mean, I think in Central Europe, elites and intellectual also is to develop a good understanding of like Russia, the phenomenon of Russian politics. What was Russia? I mean, and what is Russia right now? And not to play in this game that was like since 2014. It was very visible that in a lot of like intellectual debates and discussion in Western Europe, in Central Europe, they talking about like some super special phenomenon of Russia, and yes, of course they are like that, but look, with this Wander durch Handel, it's a change through trade, we will change them, they always will be like a little bit different than us, and it is disaster. This politics or this thinking about like this, what is Russia political class or what is Russia ideology, thinking through this lens of some like super phenomenon, other than like other classical like European, for example, fascisms or other radical movements. It's and we see at the end of the day it became the disaster for such a huge amount of people, also in Europe. So, like, my key message here is when you analyze, I mean, European intellectuals or European policymakers, when you analyze Russia, Russian political class, and if they told you that their philosophy is the philosophy of Ilyin, Schmidt, and Gumilyov, you have to actually believe them, that it's Ilyin, Schmidt, and Gumilyov, that together they are like fascists, but no one called them fascists till Bucha. So the right assessment is key to our next steps, strategy and tactics in dealing with Russian society and its political class. Thank you.
Thank you, Mykola. Jakub, is there any Polish key?
Yeah, there is one. You know, because I'm Polish, I'm a typical Russophobe, as they say in Russia. So maybe I wouldn't tell anything about the key I'm thinking of. The key to Russia. Anyway,
But you can use it to lock it.
No, because it would be hate speech. No. So I'm pessimistic about Russia, because just like my colleagues, in fact, because the Russians have been fed with poison for so long, and they are so brainwashed by Solovyov, Kabaeva, etc., Ilyin, Dugin, etc., that I don't think it is possible to change their mentality and way of thinking. I think it would take generations. Because you said about Germany and the Nazis, fascists. After World War II, it took many years, because the denazification of Germany started being effective only in 1968, when this generation looked at their fathers' generations' behaviors, etc. And in Germany, after World War II, we had the Allied occupation, and we had democracy brought by Americans, etc. So it was much easier. In Russia, I don't think it is possible. You know, it's like what Americans tried to do in some time ago. It's like trying to bring democracy to Iraqi, and expect they would be enthusiastic about it. So I'm unfortunately pessimistic about the Russians, but still we have to do something. First of all, we have to defeat the Putinocracy, and then I don't know. Actually, I don't know really.
Thank you for being frank with us. Rufin, any drop of optimism from Romania?
Well, again, being the last one speaking, I'm forced to have different approach on things, right? So I shall start by saying that I do agree with almost everything that was presented by my colleagues in this panel. But as you said, we need to cling on something. We need to have a drop of optimism here. And starting with the very fact that we cannot just pretend that Russia is not there and build a wall around it and just ignore the way they are, or generalizing and saying that everyone in Russia is just the same, is supporting this regime and is perhaps even taking advantages of the way the political regime in Russia looks like. I think that we definitely should continue our fight in keeping Russia's population as democratic as can be, and I know not refusing them a democratic future whenever this future is going to come. Circling to your question, to your very question, what to do with the Russian population in this time and age? Well, I will formulate my answer again by starting with our very own populations and what we can do in the countries and the environment that we can actually implement solutions on. And I will start with saying, I mean, there's no simple thing here, but we should start healing our own societies, and we should start healing the divides in our society, and we should start putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to democracy and democratic values. What this has to do with Russian population? Well, this is going to show them more and preach less to them, right? If we are going to heal ourselves and we're going to have better examples to show outside our borders, then who knows? In one moment in time, then this democracy and democratic values that we're all preaching and pledging allegiance to are going to become a real model for the Russian society. What can we do in the shortest run about this? Well, I said it before, raise the cost for the Putin regime in brainwashing and keeping in the dark Russia's population. How can we do this? Is not a simple endeavor by no means. It doesn't mean only fighting on the information field. It means fighting in the economic one, with supporting the restrictions and aligning ourselves to this flag of sanctioning Putin's regime and Putin's apologists and Putin's apparatchiks as much and deep as we can.
Thank you, Rufin. We do not have actually time, but we still have time for one question. And since we have a manual, just for compensation, Ms. Kazdobina, the question is yours. Just to compensate Manel with a question from a female.
Because it's going to take a long time. But the question was, okay, you talked about Russian audience, but I think the audiences, Ukrainian audiences who are now located in the occupied territories are even more important to Ukraine. So do you think there is any way to reach them? Or no, I don't know, maybe Mykola, because you seem to be the closest to the issue. Thanks.
Thank you for... I will try to be brief. It's quite hard. Look, it's very important track. The key issue here that I think all the auditory perfectly know that actually Russia, they try to impose in this temporary occupied territory like the information iron dome. So they try to cut any possibilities for any types of information from Ukraine to work, like to reach for those people in temporary occupied territories. There is like different Ukrainian governmental institutions and I think also NGOs, they are try the different, the key issue here is not content itself, but like the means of like transporting this content for those people that are there. And you also like fully understand that there is like different stratas of people. So someone is like very good in using the different applications and internet, but like there is also like the auditory of people that for example can use only like radio, and and then when we're talking about like the other means of transmission of any types of information, it's also the huge costs for that. So to install like some like radio, Veshke, please help me in towers. Yeah. So to install some radio towers, it's like huge obstacle, because Russians artillery, they triangulate those towers and firstly try to destroy them. So, but it's like we are trying, the whole branches of Ukrainian government and also civil society, we're trying to do this via like different means and through different means, but unfortunately it's like all the time we try to invent something. It's very similar, you know, to the shellings and to the like the calibers and counter battery fire. It's also very similar to this means of transmitting of any type of information for people in temporary occupied territory.
Thank you very much. Okay, just very final question. Please go ahead.
Is it working? Thank you. My name's Tim Judah. I'm a journalist from London. First of all, hello to Rufin. I'm sorry you're not here. I've got a very quick question for you, Uldis. You spoke with great passion about possible trials for people inciting genocide. But let me put it to you that there's a big problem here, is that there is actually no legal way to do that, because you need some form of command responsibility, which is what I understand was shown in the trials of the so-called journalists in the Rwanda case, the Emile Colline case, that they needed to be, they were shown to have actually transferred orders. But actually, if you're just inciting people to genocide and saying kill 1 million people, it's actually not something that you can put somebody on trial for under present war crimes legislation, as far as I understand it. So how do you intend to get these people to trial? Thank you.
All right, if I may have a very quick answer to this. I mean, you're absolutely right. But I'll put it back to you, because there is no answer to this in the current legal framework. But wouldn't these examples of how information manipulation, how the Kremlin apparatus of brainwashing has been the backbone for launching a kinetic operation, wouldn't that necessitate us as an international community based on our values of democracy and self-determination, sovereignty and all that, wouldn't that necessitate us rethinking the framework and how to hold people accountable for this? I, for one, would argue that it does. That with the pervasiveness of information and the myriad of ways that people can now be manipulated, I think the information tool has never been sharper in the history of humanity than it is now. And I think it's high time for us to think of ways to blunt it. And that's the beauty of international law, right? It's not written in stone. It is mutable, and we need to think about ways that we can learn from this experience, this horrendous and harrowing experience, to set up a system that helps us toward avoiding this in the future. So that would be my very short answer. Very, very briefly, I fully support my colleague here, Rufin, on the need to impose costs. And I just want to put this out there. The most immediate, the most important way that all of us can continue imposing costs on the Kremlin, on Russia, on those waging this illegal and brutal war, is by unequivocal support to Ukraine. Whatever Ukraine needs, we need to be continuous and steadfast in support to Ukraine. That is the way we impose costs to Russia at this moment. Once the dust settles, then we'll see about that. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava. Thank you very much. I've got a lot of signals that we have to stop here, but still I think that our speakers deserve for the very last session before we go for a lunch. And I suggest that to wrap up, we start with this final conclusion from Rufin, and we'll do it in the opposite order. So, Rufin, what's your final sentence for this session?
Thank you very much. I really don't have too much to add with what was raised here. Again, I think that we should keep doing this in networks. We should stop doing this by ourselves and think that this way we're going to generate change. So that's really all on my side.
Thank you. Jakub.
Well, finally, I'd like to say something optimistic, because, of course, we cannot underestimate the Russian disinformation and propaganda and all this machine. But on the other hand, it's not a supernatural power or something, so we shouldn't also overrate it. One example, just look at Polish-Ukrainian relations. Russia in the last century made a lot of efforts to divide Poles and Ukrainians, to spoil and poison these relations. And look what happened in an ultimate situation. They didn't spoil Polish-Ukrainian relations, despite all these efforts taken by generations, by decades. So it's not that bad.
Thank you. Mykola.
I agree with the previous speakers, and I think the very important to understand for all of us to understand that disinformation is rather the process, not the some ending position that is like we can do something and turn off this evil machine or something. So it's the process, it's new reality, it's new this information smoke that we are all societies, we are living in that. And we need to formulate responses for those modern problems that we have. So and I think when society, if we manage to to make response for this radio and mass propaganda, we also can, I mean, the West and civilized society, we also can manage to develop good response to disinformation and deal with that very similar to how we did it with mass propaganda and radio at the beginning of 1920s, 30s. Thank you.
Thank you, Mykola. And Uldis, your final message for this session.
Very, very final words, and let me just echo Jakub there on, I've been very gloomy today, so the last silver lining, I think the number 141, followed by the number 143, I'm referring to the votes at the UN. The Russia's mask and disguise has dropped, and that is the silver lining of this. The world has now seen this apparatus for what it is, and it will be very hard for it to retreat back into the shadows. And I think that's something that we can hold on, that we now know, and this is not just Central Europe, this is not just the Western Europe, 141 nations voted to condemn this illegal and brutal war. And that is my silver lining, that people now know the evil for what it is.
Thank you very much. And many thanks to all the speakers and to our audience for being active and for providing food for thought during this session. And I believe that our speakers do deserve for a round of applause.